Well, hello, that's me again. Today is September the 20th. It is Friday, happy Friday. And if anybody wonders why I'm coming up to you, next day since my last video, the answer is very simple. There is nothing really super duper necessarily strategically important which had happened, albeit it did happen in many respects. We have the situation in Lebanon, and we have obviously continuation of the special military operation. But you have to keep in mind that if you rewind back to the very start of this channel of mine, I stated from the get-go my task was to actually teach people and explain to people those peculiarities of the operational art, geopolitics. But as you can see yourself, and you already noticed it for the last almost 3 years, the events took their own, so to speak, turn and logic, and now I have to kind of float, swim with the flow, which is, of course, primarily the global conflict, if you wish. But while I'm trying to keep my videos closer to the 30 minutes, because after that people begin to lose their attention and actually the message is being, wasted. There is basically the body of things which I wanted to talk about, but events took over, as I already stated, and suddenly I find myself in very unfamiliar territory of me being a political commentator. And, well, it is what it is. Nothing I can do about it. But let's kind of go back to some things which are still, well, fundamentally they are no less important than, for example, special military operation, but which define our reality, and they are larger than merely even operations. They are primarily related to the doctrine. They are related to the strategy, if you can say so, about what West doesn't have. But let's kind of take a look at what is going on here. But we'll start, of course, with the tally, so to speak. There is a technical mistake in this table which I use here, and you will see yourself that some numbers are crossed because it's mistake, because those numbers of the armor, as you can see yourself, in Armed Forces of Ukraine and armored vehicles, they are the tally for the week, from Monday through Friday. So they accidentally put those things there. I'm pretty sure they are going to fix it. And but you can see yourself again the number of the KIAs and losses of Ukraine is absolutely horrendous. And now there's some reports that say that the losses amounted to 16,000 plus something in Kursk for them alone. So yeah, there are a number of the towns again liberated by Russians, and so the front is moving to the west inexorably, and nothing could be done about it, especially since yesterday Russia basically demolished one of the underground facilities for communications, which you might expect not exactly Ukrainian in nature. These are NATO people who man them, and what can I say, expect some reports on some very strange accidents with the helicopters or whatever. So, but I want to mention today, before I go in, is the interview of Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov today to Al Arabiya. It's actually Sky News Arabia, which is really interesting. So, and it's published on the Minister of Foreign Affairs channel on the YouTube, and I'm pretty sure you can listen to it. But what is interesting, when talking to Sky News Arabia, Lavrov he actually stated that everything what happens now after the United States primarily, but NATO in general, they leave emptiness after themselves. And I have to certainly agree with him, and this is a very important statement, because when you compare the, for example, strategies or intent of, for example, Russia or China for that matter, who go in and begin to build, construct, so develop whatever territories they go in. Yeah, in the United States you have, after the United States you have only instability, all kinds of the mayhem, and that brings us to also, people who as you saw yourself in the beginning with the video segment from Russian Defense Ministry, and the annihilation is in industrial quantities and for the armed forces of Ukraine, and all those so-called mercenaries or volunteers, or which commit incredible war crimes. Even when you have Ukrainian soldiers telling Russian civilians, run, because once they come, you know what, you're going to be raped, killed, abused, and things like that. And the amount of evidence now is overwhelming. And the question is now, how are you going to persecute them? Well, you can bet your behind on that these guys will live out their lives, if they will be able to live them out completely, in fear. Now we have this Jihad Ryobkin, I mean this war criminal from whatever, the Spiegel, and he for some reason passes in Germany and elsewhere as military expert. I don't know how the guy, he's a complete imbecile and he's a vile human being, but he complains now that, oh my god, it's in German obviously, that why Leopard 2A6, the latest model, ended up being killed in annihilated in Kursk. He said, I talked to some people in armed forces of Ukraine and they do not understand it either. Well, you cannot explain to the moron that actually that's the last desperate attempt for armed forces of Ukraine and NATO, because all this is planned in NATO to somehow save situation or do something about Russia. And that brings us to very important point, which Singh, the spokeswoman of Pentagon, I deliberately underlined their timestamp, which is at 16:51, when she was talking yesterday about the whole situation with obviously Hezbollah and Israeli Defense Force. She she states the fact that, we didn't change our position on restricting those long-range so-called attacks deep into Russian territory. And she says that, well, yeah, all those missiles, they're not going to change anything really, because Russians already moved their airfields beyond the range of ATACMS. So basically she said, go pound your sand. And this is very important. And when do you know when they lose and when they really actually lost? Because now, as I already stated, we are in the rearrangement or arrangement phase of the whole situation, which will decide how the United States will be crawling out of this, being beaten into the bloody pulp, their best ever proxy and essentially direct involvement of NATO into the operations in Ukraine. And we can start with the remarkable really remarkable article in Washington Post. I don't remember, again, you can correct me if it is CIA or FBI, whatever the outlet. There are no really independent corporate media. They are corporate media, and they are tied always to some kind of the not deep state, bureaucracy body in the United States. But here it is, the Washington Post, which did so much for democracy to die in darkness, because they contributed dramatically. So whenever you read their motto, it's really funny, it's ironic. And then suddenly they come up with yesterday with this thing. It's opinion, but it is a remarkable opinion. And they talk about that, oh my god, the losing strategy of underestimating Russia. Russia remains a formidable power. The West should not assume it is depleted military force. Well, obviously, it's kind of veiled admission that you screwed, And again, as I already stated, industrially, United States cannot even catch up to Russia, and even combined NATO, especially in the high-tech weaponry, and especially such critical weapons such as long-range fires. High-precision weapons. Russia simply outproduces combined West by the order of magnitude. And so this Mr. Hochstadter writes, aboard a NATO surveillance flight above the Norwegian Sea last week, just 2 of the 19 military personnel were as old as the plane. A 45-year-old modified Boeing 707 jammed with electronics and monitoring devices, its fuselage crowned with an enormous radar dome. Well, yeah, it's AWACS, there's nothing nothing wrong with it. Yeah, it's 45 years old. If the airframe is good, you update electronics and nothing wrong with this. And it's gonna fly. I mean, look at the B-52. It's a masterpiece of the American aeronautical engineering, and that thing flies. It will outfly everything else out there, including B-2s, and it's gonna fly for another 40 years maybe. So the same goes for Russian Tu-95, so famous bags. But so back to this article, and so now he talks about this. Oh my God. And he's talking about this exercise of Ocean 2024 or Okean 24. And they, of course, begin to like, even if Russia figures in terms of the participation or number of participant personnel are inflated, the operation was a muscle flexing reminder that Moscow remains plenty equipped to project power across the globe. I have news for this guy. Russia does not necessarily need to project power. She can. And so he talks about then suddenly the oh my God realization. That sobering fact often gets lost amidst China rising threat and Washington pivot to the Indo-Pacific. It shouldn't, because it would be a mistake once again to underestimate the Kremlin resolve to challenge the US-led global order or Moscow staying power in Ukraine. Well, Moscow staying power in Ukraine is just fine, and it's actually fights against the combined West and against essentially NATO, and it's paraded it and exposed it as the militarily paper tiger, and it's the pivot to the Indo-Pacific is also funny, but at least they begin to understand what I wrote about for the last very many years, that guys, you get into this, you're gonna get your ass handed to yourself, and guess what, this is exactly what had happened. And then, so if that hasn't been enough, and we understand it is what is the process, which you call coping or self-medication, if you wish. You always, when you lost, and you understand that you are not what you are in reality, you know, that, unlike you were projecting yourself and propagating yourself, the image of yourself as something super duper superpower. The United States is still a superpower, but it's nowhere near what it projects itself, you know, and that was exposed, as I already stated. Military technological race, United States lost it by a knockout, and I'm talking about delivery system. United States are not even in the same universe. But here we have another. So when nothing is left of this famous operational manual in terms of operations, all those critical advantages which United States thought it had over, you know, Taliban peasants and, you know, Iraqi uneducated and outgunned, completely badly trained, whatever they had armed forces, suddenly it's all gone. And guess what? So in a desperate attempt, which is of course bargaining stage of the Kubler-Ross model, we have Washington Post again, and look what they write. This is the guy, Garrett Graff. So the reason they write it, because they need to really cope. They need to, you know, address the pain they experience, which is understandable. I went through the complete collapse process in my life. I know how it works. But here it is. The US military's true advantage against any adversary is it's the NCOs who set the US military apart from the rest of the world. Well, obviously it's outright lie, and it's absolute garbage what he's talking about. But again, they need to really address, you know, reduce the pain from the basically sensing. Most of them will not understand basic things about military, including some so-called, you know, US generals who advise them. But they need to, you know, apply this, whatever the, you know, anesthetic, because obviously it hurts for them, and I can relate. But the problem is, of course, for example, unlike it was in Russia, United States never were what they, you know, slated themselves to be. I mean, there's a great, you know, story of especially U.S. Navy heroism and professionalism in the Pacific War. But other than that, U.S. military record is dismal. But so here Here he writes, go anywhere in the world, and the officer corps of nearly every nation's military looks at first glance similar to our own. No, it doesn't. Elite, disciplined, and well-educated. But peer for a moment at another country's enlisted forces, and U.S. leaders say, and you will see by comparison the real source of American strength. This is such a baloney, it's unbelievable. But so we go further and wonder what he's talking about in COs. Well, guess what? We have Mr. Milley. The only basically achievement of former Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley is that turning U.S. armed forces into the woke nightmare and basically further dissolving already not very good, especially for the U.S. Army fighting capabilities. But here we have, look what he writes. Oh, he says, he lies outright, looking through the teeth, looking into your eyes, he lies. The Russians have a system of command and control that's very micro-controlled. Then chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, said in the interview last year, they'll get attacked, let's say the battalion commander gets killed or wounded, the others will not know what to do at that point. They are paralyzed. They have no method of decision-making at that point because they've never practiced and trained it. They have no self-initiative. I don't know why the guy, I mean, not only Mr. Mark Milley will not pass any entrance exam to any Russian military academy to start with, as probably most U.S. officers, and I'm not kidding. I will demonstrate it to you, but he lies here outright. And let me show you something. Well, Mark Milley has absolutely zero grasp of what Russian military is, but look what I'm gonna show you, something about what Milley says, because it is such a load of BS that I cannot even, I don't know how to react to it. It is like, somebody comes to my home and says that, hey, Chinese guy. I say, no, I'm Russian. No, you're Chinese, because I said so, This is practically what they can do. Mark Milley, as military leader, he's nobody. He's zero, basically, as are most of the American generals who lost all their wars, and they're pathetic, honestly. But here it is. This is example, just fresh one. Remember what Mark Milley said, that there is no initiative? Well, here is from the 24th of June, the Special Military Operation Fighter replaced the wounded commander and brought the combat work to the end. Anton Platoshkin serves as a sapper. He did not tell anyone that he was going to the zone of Special Military Operation, as you can see yourself. And these are very often a representation of Russian armed forces. And guess what? In the special military operation zones, in one of the battles, Senior Sergeant Platoshkin replaced the wounded commander. So he basically, Sergeant Platoshkin, you can listen to his interview, he took the command of his platoon commander and he fought. The battle lasted 3 hours, but for him this time flew by like 1 minute. Guess what? Russians beat back all those, later trained Ukrainians, and he was wounded, but he's back at the service. And guess what? He is merely a senior sergeant. And guess what? He ran the platoon. Well, what can I say? You know what? Mark Milley obviously never served in the Russian or Soviet armed forces, unlike it was the case with me, if you know what I mean. Wink, wink. But as I already stated, when I say that Mark Milley wouldn't pass the entrance exams to, for example, any military academy in Russia which prepares lieutenants, cadre officers, fresh, I'm not exaggerating. This is the reality, and let me demonstrate this reality to you a little bit further. Let's go, for example, into you already know this book, The Russian Way of War, which is written 2016 by Dr. Lester Grau and Charles Bartos. Unlike Mark Milley, Dr. Lester Grau knows Russia. He knows Russian language very well because he is an interpreter, and he dedicated a lot in his career of writing about Russian armed forces and the Soviet armed forces. And he explains there that basically, even the book which now is essentially obsolete because the operations changed so dramatically. I cannot even explain to you how dramatically they changed in a single video. But let's take a look at what Mr. Grau writes about non-commissioned officers. And what do I know? I had 3 of them under my command. When I was, XO on my ship. So, but obviously Mark Milley knows better than me, and he knows better than a bunch of my classmates, some of whom actually commanded regiments on the ground, and so among other things, including submarines, for example, and the whole thing what is run by Russian NCOs. Yeah, and they commanded it even including in the Soviet times, including people such as, for example, Admiral Alexander Turelin, who, of course, commanded the Admiral Kuznetsov aircraft carrier and then commanded the whole carrier battle group. For example, Admiral Golubev, who is now the first deputy commander of the Northern Fleet, and he's going to be the probably commander of the Northern Fleet. What do they know? Of course, Mark Milley knows it better than anybody else, right? Well, yeah, he doesn't have a clue. And he is just coping. I mean, he's pathetic. He's a nincompoop compared to the Russian generals who actually won campaigns and wars. But hey, what do I know? And so we have the situation when Mr. Grau and Bartels write about specifically NCOs. And that's what he writes if you take a look at it. And they're talking about the brigade level. They talk about it's really officer and NCO training improved with single-tracked officers who are commanders of chiefs of staff throughout their careers, while NCOs now attend the formal academy, which may take 3 years to complete. The force still has short-term conscripts, which it does, but 99% of people who fight in the special military operations, they are professionals and they are contract people. And they are nothing like contract people which go and enlist in the U.S. Army. And again, there's no even comparison anymore. We can talk about this openly. So when they talk about this in 2016, let me explain something which they never understood. The American NCOs thing is a fairy tale. It's all garbage because, for example, in Soviet armed forces, you had Praporshchik and Michman. They were NCOs. They ran what is called commands on the either ships or on the ground. And they are totally capable in their during their combat to take command over, for example, as the Sergeant Platoshkin. He took over command of the platoon, and guess what? He's now awarded a military hero. And guess what? If Mark Milley and his cabal would have studied real history of World War II, not this garbage about George Patton, they would learn that, for example, one of the mass heroism of NCOs, Russian, those sergeants, and those NCOs was massive, including when they up to the point that some sergeants were capable to command companies, and not to speak about junior officers who took sometimes over commands of the battalions. So, but you cannot explain this because obviously Mark Milley doesn't understand what real education is in Russia and the Soviet Union. Let me explain what it takes for a Russian officer, well, not officer, at that time 18-year-old guy who gets into military academies, trying to get the what is called the profile subjects for such academies as the Naval Institute or Air Defense Military Academy or Communications Academy, and which, by the way, they always have now the departments for the NCOs. As I already stated, they study 3 years. Officers study 5, and it's extremely extensive and intensive programs. And just to give you example about what he doesn't understand, this is what the type of the exams they have to take. As you can see yourself, this is the what is called Unified Standard Exam for 2025, Russian Ministry of Education. And as you can see yourself, you have to pass all kinds of those trigonometry, exponential equations, there's a number of calculus things. So, then, you can go and do physics. Obviously, physics actually doesn't really exist as the mandatory exam. If you go into the military academy and even to NCOs, you need to take, physics exams. Well, guess what? It's dynamics, It's kinematics, all trigonometry, all kinds of other things of this nature. Here's physics exam too, electrodynamics and thermodynamics and things like that. Yes, this is public school, okay? And then comes, as you can, apart from this academics, which you need to pass through. I know, I did it myself. 4 exams at that time. Now, Russian military academies, such as special academies which deal with the high-tech sectors of the armed forces, be them naval, be them air force, be them air defense, be them communications. Well, guess what? This is the level which American students in universities begin to only approach. But you cannot explain this to Mark Milley because he has no clue. So he thinks that, as Mr. Buchan, who writes about the collapse of the American military education in his Cost of Loyalty book, which created a huge reaction. Well, let me tell you about something what he talks here about the cost of loyalty. America has been losing wars without realizing why. This trend of deteriorating mental standards, strangely enough, has generally escaped the notice of social scientists and historians. Of course, it escaped. American military history is primarily confabulated, especially World War II, where America, as we all know, defeated Hitler single-handedly, while those little Russians, they kind of helped somewhere on the sidelines. But the scientists from the West Point Command, instead of reporting the intellectually hollowing out of West Point and the military and turning to Americans for solution, the military academies have lied about the problem. And he is talking about, for example, the academies are starting at such a low level, trying to prevent rape and homicide by cadets on campus, that it seems impossible they could evolve into institutions that recruit and develop top students and officers. I agree with him, with Buchan, because I see the results. I see the people who believe in all kind of crap, for example, like UK propaganda, which testifies to about extremely low, even tactical, forget about operational level of the, those premier institutions. And here they talk about, for example, the way in the academy concerning 13 first-year cadets who allegedly cheated on knowledge test. He was talking actually, I believe, in U.S. Air Force Academy. But still, the tests were so simple and superficial, naming well-known military leaders, that the tests were not even counted when calculating grade point averages. A spokesman for the academy said the investigations were necessary because we developed leaders who will lead airmen in the future. So, yeah, people cannot, wow, what a test, yeah. Obviously, thermodynamics and electrodynamics and calculus and all that thing which is taught in public school evidently is still beyond their reach. And here is the one about Mr. Mark Milley, his alma mater. So in 2009 article, Tom Riggs recommended the elimination of military academies altogether. Do not forget, West Point at some point of time has been considered to be reduced to the 3-year institution. That means what? It's about the same as the level of Russian NCOs. In why we should get rid of West Point, an article in the Washington Post, he proposed shut down West Point, Annapolis, and the Air Force Academy. I disagree with him on this issue, but I mean, that tells you that you cannot get decent people through ROTC anymore in the United States because the level of public education is disastrous. The public education for the public schools, unless we're talking about people who can afford advanced placement courses, is catastrophic. It's the third world. I know. I had tutoring company for 15 years. And so they talk about while the current model at West Point and Academy should be abandoned, America is unlikely to find better officers through ROTC programs. At other colleges, the standards to become an Army officer, regardless of the source, have been declining for over 100 years. As Arthur T. Combe and special scientist colleagues at West Point have found, the standards at West Point and in ROTC plummeted even further in 2000 as they adopted developmental models in which they accepted deficient at-risk students for any number of reasons. The number of waivers for medical and physical reasons through which to gain admission despite deficiencies shot up sharply, while test scores, especially the test scores of cadets on the lower edge of the quality distribution, sank. So there you go. And that Mr. Milley, you know what, he's a product of the West Point and all those wonderful American, general staff and command colleges and things like that. And when you explain to people, you don't understand this is completely different world, Russian military education. And guess what? Those Russian NCOs who performed extremely well, some of them substituting during the battle their commanders, guess what? Once it's over, or it's already over for them because they did their term or several terms, they will go into the academies, military academies. They will have their privileged enrollment, obviously, because of the combat record and things like that. I know we had Afghan veterans who went through the separate track, who started with us and became the naval officers. So, but yeah, it's when you look at that and you try to explain it to this, that means desperation. It's a coping because they understand they are not even in the same league. So that is why I constantly state that the task here is not just merely accuse somebody or laugh at them. And I can totally relate to some American officers who are great officers, who are courageous people, very competent and things like that. It doesn't mean that Russians do not have nincompoops. Of course, Russia has its own share of morons, delinquents and things like that. Nobody says that's kind of rosy picture, but overall level in Russian education, starting from the school, it's incomparable. United States is not even in the same league. And again, as I already stated, just take, for example, what is physics. They don't study really anything serious in physics because it doesn't exist really as the serious subject. So, and when it kind of projects itself to the, essentially the situation with the Russian military education and preparedness, this is the same as what they write in the Washington Post. Oh my God, we didn't recognize that Russia is a huge power. Well, you didn't, it's your problem. And guess what? In conclusion, my good friend, by the way, senior American officer, well, almost pre-admiral rank, if you wish, he sent me this. And this is a very interesting situation about the Naval War College, postgraduate school actually, pardon me, where he is, they talk about this new program they introduced now. It's called the Great Power Competition Overview. I can tell you immediately, this is absolutely not what is required because obviously there's simply no Russia or China real, specialist in the United States. But with the rise of China and return of Russia to near-peer military, well, thank you very much. So now they condescendingly talk about near-peer Russian military, which basically United States Army cannot even be in the same league. But hey, whatever. Military status with the United States, the topic renewed, and they talk about, of course begins with a brief overview of the core dynamics of great power competition. Historically, it's Cold War manifestations, which, by the way, also was rewritten in the United States in the bipolar arms race. And you have to, and I understand, you have to come to those people and, when you tell them, guys, you lost the arms race badly. And they thought that they defeated Soviet Union in Cold War. Well, in reality, the Soviet Union disintegrated pretty much on its own. I mean, maybe 10% of it was related to the influence of the West. But can you imagine how those people have to live now through this, moment in history? And I actually have pity, I have sympathy for them, because it is very difficult to face the destruction of all this military mythology when the only successes U.S. military has are primarily in Hollywood. So, and when you look at it intensively in the history of World War II, United States, with the exception of the books by David Glantz and Jonathan House, is yet to write the honest book about World War II. And when you live in the world of mythology and fairy tales, you're not going to get far. And we observe today it's paraded around the world. And this is what I wanted to tell you guys today. And before I go, as always, I want to thank my wonderful patrons. And As always, those who like what I do, please subscribe to my channel, and those who can afford, please support me on the Patreon or buy me a coffee on Tomb. I would really appreciate this. You see, need coffee. No, I'm just kidding. All right, have a nice weekend. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.